Hello, Leicester. Radio audio is in an incredibly exciting place. I think we'd all agree. It's never been so easy to make. It's never been so easy to deliver, in theory. And as far as linear radio is concerned, we had the latest radar figures last week. It's still at 88%. 88% of people, 88% of people still tuning in for hours and hours of their lives. And actually what I love in radar is you can calculate, that's the weekly reach, you can calculate the monthly reach, which gets to 98%. How dare those 2% not listen to radio? It's an incredibly powerful medium, as we know. But underneath those statistics, what's really special about it, and you know this better than anyone, is the relationship that people have with their radio stations. We've heard stories today. You will have your own stories over the past week, month, where you can say you've had communication from someone who says, your radio station has changed my life. I run Boom Radio. It's not a station like yours, but nevertheless it serves a community who feel very passionately about who they are and the age they are, and the letters and the emails, and there are letters, that I get make me sometimes cry. Radio is an incredible medium. It's done best when it's listener-focused, when you start with what the listener wants, who they are, what is their appetite, and then you work backwards from there. I know rather too many radio stations that start the other end. What do we fancy doing? Rather than, what is the listener expecting from my radio station? A brief look at legacy, bearing in mind the theme of today is legacy and tomorrow. Here we are in Leicester, the home of the first ever BBC local radio station, back in the late 60s, co-funded, of course, at that stage by the local authority. So Leicester has a historic place in radio's timeline. Also because here was the city where the first commercial radio station went bust. So that was an interesting stage in the early 80s. I wasn't there, that was Centre Radio. Brighter every day, brighter every way, for those of you who like your Sue Manning jingles. Centre went bust. I was at the second incarnation of commercial radio here in the mid-80s, which was Leicester Sound. And I can tell you that was tough too, following on from a station that had gone bust, and we probably would have keeled over as well, had it not been for leaning on Radio Trent down the road. It's not apocryphal to say that the Coke machine in the hallway of Leicester Sound was making more money than the radio station. It was tough. We didn't talk about mental health in those days because it was the 80s, but I was in a pretty dark place, I have to say, at that stage, and found it really difficult to cope, and walked out in the end to no job. And one of the reasons that pushed me over the cliff was I was being forced to carry programmes from Radio Trent in Nottingham in the afternoon, and I thought that was the wrong thing at the wrong time for that radio station pursuing the strategy it did. So it was a tough time. I'm mentioning these case histories because I think they're interesting and relevant to where radio has gone still. I moved on to Links FM, and again, that was tough, starting that radio station. We sat there in the early months wondering whether we could afford to pay the salary bill. You will be familiar with the challenge of wondering whether you can afford to pay your bills. That was the challenge we had there. And then on to the Midlands more recently. We acquired BRMB in Birmingham and Mercia and Beacon Radio and Wyvern, and you'll know some of these radio stations. And when I arrived there, I thought, great, because I'm an anorak at heart, that's what I am. I've got everybody's mug in my kitchen. And I thought, great, we can bring local radio now back to these cities. And we tried. The initial strategy was, let's make BRMB great again. Have I really used that phrase? But, and we brought back the walkathon, the sponsored walk. We turned on all the Christmas tree lights. We had a big newsroom. We had radio stations that regularly we didn't need. We really tried. And when we went to the focus groups, they loved the idea of BRMB, but they were going to listen to Heart because they preferred the music, or going across to Galaxy. They were going to different stations for different reasons. They did say BRMB is good because of the snow line. And that came out in every single focus group, which is lovely, but you can't run a radio station just on the 3 snowy days of the year. It was a real challenge. And of course, what adds to those challenges is that you've got all these other radio stations coming in above you. Huge brands, they can afford the marketing, they've got a single name, they can go on television. You're trying to market these different radio stations in different markets. The battle for talent is on because your presenters want to go and work for the bigger station down the road. You're simulcasting on DAB and FM. And what's more, the economy, and you'll face this when you try to get cash from local businesses, the high street is not what it was. When I started in radio, there were huge local companies with cash and they wanted to support you. And that's not the case now. What have we got? We've got empty shops. And the shops that remain are often part of national chains who don't have local money. So the money that was underpinning that tier of radio was diminishing. So it was a real challenge to run a standalone commercial radio station. And for almost worse in the big cities, ironically. Even more challenging now as things have changed. Some of the smaller stations that remain are working well, where they've got a unique proposition, maybe in an area without other media, where their offering is truly unique, but it's still tough for them. And some of the smaller commercial radio operators would agree that life is very tough, just as it is for you here today. So, what's the situation now? We've got commercial radio edging out of local. The door was wide open for a new way of looking at what else we can do in the local audio sphere. Here's my question today. Is the licensing and funding structure for local audio fit for purpose for this century? Do the various sorts of local radio stations work sympathetically together, or in a sense, do they not? I mean, let's just have a think about the various ways that you can be on the air these days. You've got your community radio FM traditional licenses. You've got your community radio small-scale DAB licenses. Or if you like, you can come up with a bit of cash and buy some capacity as a non-community operator on your small-scale DAB, or on the local DAB, if you like. Or you can start an online radio station, or you can do a podcast, or you can be on the BBC local radio station. How many different sorts of radio stations there, all with public value? Each of those delivers some public value. Isn't it scandalous that the vast majority of public funding goes on only one of them? £123 million on content alone, let alone the transmission, on just BBC radio. Think what you could do with a slice of that money. We heard about the Community Radio Fund earlier on. That's a small amount of money. And also some of these people doing very worthwhile audio can't access the funds. And you are competing for the same pot. It's not a very sensible way, I would have thought, of running audio. It's the way it's always been. Now, BBC Local Radio, I'm not going to talk a long time about this, but I can't say they don't deserve that money without saying why they don't deserve that money. And to them, they think they've got no money. I don't know how they spend quite so much money on generating those local radio stations. I suspect you're with me on this. We'll be told later, no doubt, that the license fee is frozen, times are tough. Well, you talk to a business in Leicester about frozen income. They would pray for frozen income, the way the economy's been. Frozen income at a high level is great. We're told that people are getting their news online these days. Yeah, I think we know that because we all do it. So yes, you need to make your online offering a little better, but why sacrifice local radio to do that? We're told that journalism is going to be better resourced with all this new cash that's going into it. Well, is it? The ears are going from local radio. You don't get better news stories than someone sitting there taking calls and speaking to real people in a real local radio station. That's where you get the stories that aren't in press releases. That's where you get the things that people are really talking about. That's the way to identify it. We're told the stations are all staying. Well, no, they're not. The aerial might be, and the transmitter might be. But you've taken the heart and soul out of those radio stations. You've taken the people with whom a listener had built a relationship. How dare you? It is outrageous. We're told that the stations will go local in adversity. Well, they have in recent weeks. Some have responded really well, others have responded less well. But when you're getting the breakfast team back again for a second shift, it sounds like a bit of a wing and a prayer. And in those times, in times of adversity, you need the very best broadcasters on the air. Reassuring, comforting, putting their arm around a community of people they know. That's what it's about. That's how a radio station operates in times of adversity. We're told it's local when most people are listening. Well, actually, if you look at the local hours, they're only reaching 80% of their total reach. The rest of those people won't hear that localness. We're told that sport's staying. Well, a lot of it's actually not. We're told that news is staying. Well, no, some bulletins are shorter, some have gone altogether. Some are shared, some have got half a minute of travel in them where it wasn't there. They've diminished. We're told that it's going to be implemented well. I have never seen such a poorly implemented plan in all my days in radio. It is appalling. We all listen to the gaps on there, the junctions, people, and I'm not blaming the broadcasters here, nor some of the local managers who are trying their best to manage the unmanageable. But it's a mess. I mean, they're using this system called Vylor, and this was a brave new system. I can't get the price of it because the BBC have refused to give it to me. This new studio and a whole operational system to deliver audio. They spent 2 years almost training people on this. I checked this morning with somebody who was involved. They had, wait for this figure, 15 trainers working for about 2 years, staying in hotels at the various stations. Can you imagine the cost of that? Meanwhile, anybody who walks through the door now won't get trained. Oh, it's just there, just do this, it'll be fine. You know, we know how it's like. Thinking, on what planet are they? And I wrote some years ago when they commissioned me to write a report about this system, and I said, that system won't do what you will want it to do. And sure as eggs, it doesn't. And I'm not even going to touch here on the way they've handled their people in recent days. It is. I'm not going to talk about it. I said I wouldn't talk about it, so I'm not going to. I believe that the changes are at odds with their charter. I believe that the way they've been implemented is actually contrary to the principles of the BBC. Ofcom, who do a good job. I mean, Ofcom is such a mega regulator of so many different areas of business and telecoms, way away from radio and even television. I'm not sure they're particularly good at regulating the BBC. The operating licence asks very little of BBC Local Radio in exchange for over £100 million of public money. That licence was poorly drafted. They said they'd consulted on the changes. Well, it was like a business-to-business consultation. Mr. Miggins in Clarendon Park is not going to wade through to page 23 to see a small change of drafting, which could mean that his favourite presenters won't be on the air in the morning. That was not fit for purpose. That consultation, those consultations, were not in line with their own principles. As for the complaints process, I don't know whether you've tried it. You've got to go through the BBC before you're allowed to complain to Ofcom. That's a luxury that you don't have. You can have any scurrilous individual in your community writing straight to Ofcom. And the same is true of commercial radio. You've got to go through the BBC and try making a general point to the BBC about all these changes. The form computer says no. It's not a very good way. And of course, we do know that you are being hounded by Ofcom. You face the challenges you do with obligations which are far, far in excess of BBC Local Radio, on next to nothing, relying on volunteers, and if you put a toe over the line, you're getting harangued. That is wrong. I'm fully, and I'm sure the conscientious operators who are here today will agree, if a station is egregiously bad, or if actually it's not doing the thing it was there to do, which is not just on air, it's off air as well, well, of course the regulator should intervene. But I'm not sure that regulator is fit for purpose. So, tomorrow, because today's all about today and tomorrow. No, it's about legacy and tomorrow. I've done it all anyway. So tomorrow, what's the answer? Well, I don't know. Maybe you have some of the answers. Maybe, and I'm just floating this here, maybe it's a local audio authority. And this is almost grabbing an idea from the Annan report from 1977. Just like radio, things always go round and round. But, is there a case for an audio authority which gets the public money and distributes it to deserving projects, radio stations, programs, people, whatever it is. Get that public money and put it in places where we know it's going to benefit listeners and communities, not sucked into the BBC in that way. And take BBC Local Radio into that fold. License, support, train and operate the frequencies as well. So many aerials beaming out the same thing across the country. Think what some other operators could do with access to that spectrum. There are models, we heard earlier on about some of your stations that have benefited from projects from the Audio Content Fund. That was an interesting project. I was on the panel awarding those amounts of money, and I thought Helen Bowden chaired that project just beautifully. And also the Local Democracy Reporter. You know, they have done a good job. BBC actually operate these, but it's funded by public money. Now that may or may not be the answer. You are closer to the challenges. There needs to be change. I know the BBC talk about digital first. All they had to do was bring their newsrooms together. There's huge antagonism between the online journalists and the radio journalists. Had you just, with a bit of leadership, brought those together, this could have been sorted 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I've just been on BBC Devon's website on the BBC, you know, news about you, Devon. Okay, you'll be pleased to know that since yesterday evening, one thing has happened across the whole of Devon. Actually, it didn't happen yesterday. It was a council meeting that discussed water fountains in Devon earlier in the week, and that story was supplied by the Local Democracy Reporter. Oh, yeah, sure. That one story, hosted by the Local Democracy Reporter, rather than by the BBC. So, what I'm saying is there needs to be a new way forward if local audio is to have the healthy future that it really, really deserves. Thank you.
So yeah, David, I wasn't trying to get you off stage. I know you still got time. Did you want to ask any questions?
Sure, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so is there anyone that has a question? Oh, here we go. Ladies
or
first.
A better idea.
Hi, I just want to say that was great, absolutely great. We was saying how inspirational that speech was. How do you feel, I mean, you're saying about everything that the BBC's done and everything with getting rid of local radio has been terrible, but how do you feel that's going to really, really impact us? Because I think that that's been absolutely amazing, incredible for us, because everyone that was listening to local radio has come to community radio now, which is, yeah. So in a way, we're really angry at them, but we're really grateful to them as well.
Well, I'm running a radio station for older people. I'm delighted they're messing it all up. You know, and they say that it's because linear radio is dying. It's not in the 50-pluses. You know, Smooth has got record audiences at the moment. Heart 70s has got record audiences at the moment. All these radio stations, Gold is on a peak at the moment. And there are, if I look back to 2018 when the current management came in, they've lost 10 million listening hours. Those radio stations are going down, not because linear radio is failing, it's because they're astonishingly badly run. But anyway, sorry, to answer your question, I think you're right. This is an opportunity. This is what I was getting at. Things are changing. Commercial radio has changed. BBC Local Radio has changed. This is an opportunity to get it right. But I think you need a bit of help to do that. And with your current resources and with the way you are harangued by all these things, there needs to be a change.
Yeah. David, fantastic presentation. My name's Steve Haig of Radio Knightsbridge.
Hi, Steve.
The challenge is, how is the BBC going to be funded? I agree entirely with you. BBC Local Radio should be buying in programmes from community radio or buying some news that we make. They should be buying that in, paying us. That would be one thing. But you talk about that 100 million and it should be better distributed. But would you agree that what's happening in local radio, it's been lined up for privatisation when the day comes when there's no licence fee? So really the question is to you, how is all this going to be paid for when the licence fee ends? which the government has signalled it will end. Both Labour and Conservatives have said the same. 2027. What's going to happen?
Well, we've heard about the end of the licence fee for Trevor Downs here for a long time, and we go through these ebbs and flows. I don't think it's going to disappear anytime soon. I think there will always be, quite rightly, some subsidy for the BBC. May I say, actually, that I am the BBC's biggest supporter. I would campaign naked down Gallatry Gate to save the BBC. I think it is the people at the BBC who actually are breaking their own regulations. But I think that there will always be some degree of funding. It may not be a licence fee, it may be out of general taxation or whatever. I hope there's still a bundle of cash there. But the BBC needs to spend it wisely. And in fairness, like most big organisations, it's not doing that now.
Yes, David, great presentation. Can I sort of strengthen your point that you were making about BBC Local Radio? Because last Saturday was a good example where there were lots of floods in Suffolk and in Norfolk. And the BBC breakfast programme on a Saturday morning covers the whole of the eastern region now from Dunstable. And the floods were relevant to Suffolk and Norfolk, but people were ringing Three Counties Radio saying, well, what's it got to do with us? So Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Cambridgeshire and Essex, all that information for 4 hours about the floods was completely irrelevant and not of interest at all. So a classic example of how regional radio just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I have to say, this is in no criticism of the poor people who've been appointed to do these huge shows. They are trying their best, and I know many of the people. But you're right, these areas are not local. In the BBC's submission, it said they're bringing together cohesive areas. They've got a very funny definition of that. And when I've asked Ofcom for how did the BBC say these areas were cohesive, there was no evidence. And they said it's going to work the same as the evening programmes on BBC, which work very well, but they're evening magazine programmes on a television station. It's not the same as a 4-hour show on a BBC local radio station. So you're right, these areas are made up and an open door for someone doing something else more locally. And hyperlocal, of course, is going great guns. People, on your phone, you're getting direct information coming in. Some of the local press titles and websites are doing great business. You guys are doing some interesting things. Hyperlocal is where it's at. At Boom Radio, our ad targeting is targeted, postcode by postcode if needed. Surely that technology is where it's at, actually making sure that the information is absolutely tailored to you, not to 7 counties together. It's mad. It's mad. Have you got time for any more, or do you want me to shut up? One more. Oh.
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, good. Right, okay. A great speech today. I mean, obviously we've been bashing the BBC a bit, and they've been well bashed. And so they should, over local radio. I just wanted to ask you, really, because I was kind of thinking back that you did a project for the radio centre, which did look to us in the community radio sector as a bit disparaging to what we were doing at the time. Has it kind of come full circle now? Do you kind of realise what it is we're actually doing? Sorry if that's an awkward question,
no,
but
not
I think
at
it's
all.
a question that needed to be asked.
No, absolutely. Thank you for asking it. I mean, a lot has changed since that report. We've talked about BBC local radio changes. A lot of the smaller commercial stations are now in the hands of larger groups. And
so you were protecting smaller
I was looking at those small ones, and a lot of those are now in the hands of larger groups. Well, if you haven't got a local radio station there, that's really, because as we know, in a local area, there isn't a lot of money, and the more that gets shared out between more and more stations, the more difficult it becomes. So in areas where you haven't got a local station, relying on local revenue and fighting for your audiences, fill your boots. You should be able to take as much cash through the door from as many places as you absolutely want. And I would support now that freedom. I still have sympathy with the small local operators battling on, who are paying a salary bill and trying to, compete against advertising rates and all those things. I still have those sympathies. But there's been a lot of change really in the sort of operators on the ground and how they are operating. The other thing is, I called for a report in community radio, and GFK did a really useful study back in 2021, a couple of studies, one quant, one qual, just in the value of community radio, and I think that was really, really needed, and was, gave some wonderful stories about the work that you do on the ground.
Okay, so just quickly, because I'm not going to hog the time, because we've got to move on. But from the inference of what you were saying, you'd like a lighter touch regulation from Ofcom for community radio, or have I misjudged that?
I'd like a more sensible approach. I think you would support me in, let's not get a community radio license and then just try to be a commercial station that was on air in 1975.
Yeah.
If you honourably want to do what you want to do, and that's clear, let you get on with it.
Yeah. I sometimes feel we haven't got one hand tied behind our back, we've got two.
Yeah, I agree.
And, that's got to change. Thanks, David. Inspirational speech. Marvellous.
Thank you, and thank you for that last question.
Brilliant.